I broke into my old school at night, thinking it would be empty, but the halls were waiting and class was already in session. From the outside, the old school was nothing more than a carcass of memories. Broken windows sealed with warped plywood, bricks darkened by decades of rain, and a playground where rust had eaten the swings until they groaned in the wind like tortured voices. Most people in town avoided the place. They whispered about accidents, about missing children, about a fire that no one could quite prove had ever happened. But to me, it was just nostalgia and curiosity that I should have ignored. The side door wasn't even locked. Its paint curled away like dead skin as I pushed, and the hinges gave a moan so long and low it felt like the whole building exhaled. I stepped inside, expecting dust, cobwebs, maybe rats. Instead, I was greeted with a sharp temps of chalk dust and disinfectant. A scent so familiar it pulled me back into childhood, but the air was too heavy, too present, as though the walls themselves were breathing it in and out. The hallways stretched ahead of me, lined with rows of grey lockers. Most were scarred by graffiti or dented, their metal warped from age. A few had swung open, exposing the contents inside. Textbooks swollen with damp, a lone gym shoe, and in one locker my stomach clenched an old notebook. Its cover wasn't just worn, it was scratched. Thin, jagged gouges dug deep, repeating the same downward motion again and again, as if someone had clawed at it until their fingers bled. I told myself it was just vandalism, kids sneaking in, daring each other. But as I flipped the notebook open, the pages were swollen and nearly fused together with rot. When I pried one apart, the ink bled into a shape I swore looked like a handprint. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed and flickered. Every third bulb was dead, leaving the hallway striped in alternating greenish light and suffocating shadow. Each time the lights dimmed, I thought I saw movement at the edge of vision, like shoes scraping. The corner of a jacket disappearing into darkness. My footsteps weren't alone. The sound came back at me, always just behind, always just late enough to be wrong. I stopped. The echo stopped. My skin prickled. Then it came again, one extra step. Not mine. I hurried past a row of classroom doors, their glass panes clouded with grime. One door hung open just enough for me to glimpse the chalkboard inside. It was clean, except for faint chalk dust smeared across its surface. The kind of residue left after words had been erased too quickly. That's when I heard it. A bell dotted. Wasn't the crisp electric chime I remembered from my school days. This sound was warped, metallic, stretched into something unnatural. It rang as if underwater, vibrating through my chest instead of my ears. I froze mid-step, every nerve screaming at me not to move. The bell rang again, closer this time. The open classroom door pulled at my vision. I glanced back, and in the chalk dust that had been blank moments before, new letters stood sharp and deliberate. Welcome back. The chalk hadn't rolled. No hand had written them. The words had simply appeared. I backed away, but the lights flickered violently, plunging the hall into darkness. For a breathless instant, the only thing visible was the faint glow of those words on the board. Then the light snapped back, and the sound of a desk dragging slowly across the floor echoed down the corridor ahead of me. I wasn't alone in this school, and whatever else was here, it knew me. The door groaned as it swung open, the hinges weeping rust flakes onto the floor. The smell hit me first. Damp paper, mold, and something bitterly metallic that made the back of my throat tighten. The air felt different here, heavier. as if the room itself had been sealed and preserved in its own stale breath. 30 desks sat in perfect, suffocating rows. Dust coated them in thick layers, disturbed only by faint streaks, though invisible hands had brushed across them just moments ago. Each desk bore scars of years gone by, initials gouged deep into wood, names half-finished, messages that bled into nonsense. Some scratches overlapped, forming strange patterns that looked less like vandalism and more like symbols. But one desk in the far back stood out. It wasn't simply marked. Its surface had been torn apart. Deep, jagged gouges clawed down its length, splintering the wood until it curled like peeling skin. I reached out, pressing my fingertips into the grooves, and jerked back. The wood was warm, the lights above hissed, flickered, and for a fraction of a second the room was alive. Every desk was filled. Children sat hunched forward, their spines stiff, heads tilted just enough that I could feel their gaze, though I couldn't see their eyes. Hands rested perfectly folded on scratched desks, knuckles pale against the dark wood. Then the light steadied and the seats were empty. The silence was unbearable. I thought I could hear my own blood rushing in my ears, but beneath it came another sound, the subtle scrape of chalk against slate. I turned. The board was no longer clean. Lines scrawled themselves across it, deliberate and sharp, though no hand held the chalk. The words formed slowly, painfully, as though dragged out of the stone. "Stay in your seat." The chalk clattered to the floor. Though it had never been lifted, I stumbled back into a desk, the chair screeching across the floor with a sound like tearing metal. The noise split the air, and the bell rang again. But it wasn't the school bell I remembered. It was warped, shrill, each toll stretching longer than it should, vibrating through the bones in my chest. The room darkened, the fluorescent sputtering until they went out completely. For a heartbeat there was nothing but pitch black. Then a faint green glow filled the space, the exit sign above the door, barely enough to outline the rows of desks. And in that glow, the chalkboard hissed again. Letters burned themselves into the slate with a white fire, sparks spitting into the dark. Detention. The temperature dropped. My breath fogged, and then the desks began to move. Not all at once, first one, then another, dragging slightly across the floor as though something invisible had sat down or shifted its weight. Soon, every desk scraped slowly, agonizingly, the sound building into a chorus that filled the room with a grinding wail. I lunged for the door, but when I twisted the handle, it didn't move. It wasn't locked, it was resisting, as if something on the other side pressed back against me. That's when the tapping began, for sharp raps against the small glass pane set into the door. I froze. The taps came again, rhythmic, impatient, but the sound wasn't coming from the hallway. It was from inside the glass. I raised my eyes. Something moved within the pane itself, as though the glass wasn't reflecting the classroom but holding another scene entirely. A pale face pressed forward from the other side, features blurred, lips stitched shut with black thread. Its eyes met Manor, rather, the empty sockets where eyes should have been. The pane quivered as the thing behind it tapped once more. And then, with impossible clarity, words appeared across the glass in fogging condensation, as if it exhaled them from its sewn mouth. Class is not over. The hallway didn't just stretch, it breathed. The ceiling seemed to rise and fall with each step I took, like the entire school was inhaling, holding me inside its chest. The air was stale, tinged with copper and chalk dust, every breath scraping my throat raw. Rows of lockers loomed on either side. In the half-light, their dented doors looked like tombstones, their thin vents like grinning mouths. I thought I saw movement behind the slats, shadows shifting, pale shapes pressing against the metal. A soft clink, clink, echoed as if fingernails were tapping from the inside. I quickened my pace. My footsteps echoed back, always a fraction of a second late, as if something just behind me mimicked every move. When I stopped, the echo didn't. The lights buzzed overhead, flickering in jagged rhythms. A fluorescent tube popped and showered sparks. For a split second of darkness, I felt a hand brush across my shoulder. When the light returned, the hall stretched longer, impossibly longer, lined with doors that hadn't been there before. Each bore the same black numbers, 101, over and over, endlessly repeating. Some numbers looked freshly painted, others smeared, as though written with something darker than ink. I reached one of the doors and pressed my hand against the glass. Cold mist clung to it, and words began to scrawl across the surface from the other side. Class is still in session. The chalk scrape came again, echoing through the empty corridor. Desks dragging across the floor, chairs shifting, pages turning, but every door was shut. Every window was dark. Then the lockers began to rattle. First a few, then dozens, then all of them. The entire hallway thundered with their clanging. Dust rained down. My ears rang. And then silence. Handles had changed. They weren't handles anymore. They were pale fingers, long, bony, some still tipped with ragged nails. They curled and flexed, tapping against the metal, pointing at me. One locker door bent outward with a squeal, bulging as if something inside pressed against it, desperate to crawl out. The seam split slightly, and a pale eye stared through the crack. I stumbled backward into the center of the hall. That's when I noticed the floor. Scratches ran along the tiles, sharp gouges in straight parallel lines like desks dragged into formation. The marks stretched ahead, guiding me deeper, toward a single door glowing faintly at the far end. Another 101, but this one breathed. The glass pulsed with fog, clearing just enough to show a figure in sight, slumped, stitched, waiting. The school bell shrieked again, this time so loud it rattled my teeth. My vision swam. Lockers banged in rhythm with the toll, like 1,000 fists pounding in unison. And in the ringing chaos, the glowing door creaked open. From the darkness inside, something whispered, "Take your seat." The door to room 101 slammed shut behind me, and the echo rattled through my bones like a gavel. The air inside was thicker, heavier dust, and chalk clung to my throat with every breath. The classroom stretched farther than it should have, rows of desks disappearing into darkness. The first ones were close and clear, but each row after seemed taller, warped, like perspective had been broken. I blinked hard, but the far end never came into focus. It was as if the room had no back wall at all. Every desk bore carvings, names, dates, and strange symbols gouged into the wood. I ran my hand over one. The grooves felt fresh, the splinters sharp. The name carved there wasn't someone else's, it was mine. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, buzzing in stuttering pulses, throwing the room into alternating slices of light and shadow. In the flashes, I saw movement shapes filling the desks, but when the light steadied, the seats were empty again. Then the chalkboard screamed. A jagged squeal echoed as chalk scraped across it in invisible hands, so forceful the board itself seemed to shake. The words burned themselves into view. Lesson 1, don't leave. The chalk froze, trembling, then dragged itself across the board again. Lesson 2, you never did. The desks creaked, wood groaned, nails rattled, chairs began to move. Slowly, steadily, the classroom filled, not with students walking in, but with shadows bleeding out of the corners, forming silhouettes in every seat. They were pale, skeletal things, heads stitched where mouths should be, black tar dripping down the seams. Empty sockets glistened wetly, following me no matter where I turned. One student leaned forward, a pencil jabbed through its hand, the tip grinding against the desk as if trying to finish a test. Another had chalk crushed between its teeth, shards sticking out from its cracked lips. The bell tolled, a hollow, metallic clang that shook the windows. Every stitched head snapped upward. Clang. Every socketless gaze turned toward me. Clang. The desks began to shift. Chairs scraped in unison, the sound so sharp it rattled through my skull. The chalkboard shrieked again, the chalk dragging as if pressed by something furious. Writing in all caps, jagged strokes tearing flakes off the surface. Lesson 3, you belong here. The stitched students rose, one by one, in perfect rhythm, their sewn mouths splitting wider, the stitches tearing open as more tar gushed down their chests. The air reeked of rot and chemicals. They began to move, slow, deliberate steps, forming a semicircle around me. And then I saw him. The teacher, he, emerged from the dark at the front of the class. Impossibly tall, skin thin as parchment, stretched over bones that jutted like hooks. His eyes were nothing but 2 chunks of chalk rammed into his skull, white dust crumbling down his hollow cheeks. In one hand, he gripped a ruler, splintered and jagged like a blade. In the other, a noose braided from torn ropes and frayed cords. He dragged the rope across the floor, the fibers whispering like sandpaper. He raised the ruler and pointed to an empty desk right in front of me. His voice was dry, a rasp that scraped like chalk on slate. Sit. My knees nearly gave out. The students moved closer, desks groaning as if the wood itself urged me forward. I felt the room pulse, every wall breathing in unison, the ceiling lowering with every heartbeat. The chalkboard erupted one final time, the words scrawled in frantic, jagged white. Final lesson, class never ends. And then the bell tolled again, louder, louder, until it drowned out my own scream. The bell tolled a final time. The sound wasn't just noise anymore. It was a force, vibrating through the floor, the walls, my ribs, my teeth. Every ring was like a command, and every command was one I couldn't resist. The stitched students stood frozen in mid-step, their heads bowed slightly as if waiting for something. Tar dripped slowly from their torn mouths, pooling black around their feet. The skeletal teacher lowered his jagged ruler, the chalk-dust eyes cracking as flakes fell with each blinkless stare. His lips moved, but no words came out, just a hiss like chalk dragged across slate. Then the chalkboard lit up, not with chalk this time, but with something glowing underneath the surface, as if the wall itself had become alive. Letters burned into view, one at a time. Welcome to detention. The air shifted. The desks began to creak, not from weight, but from breath as if the wood itself was inhaling. The chairs scraped backward, moving by themselves. Each empty seat groaned as though invisible bodies had just taken their places. I turned toward the door, except there was no door anymore. Only lockers, floor to ceiling, row after row, endless. stretching far past what the room should allow. Each locker rattled violently, doors clanging, until their handles twisted and bent into pale, bony fingers clawing outward. My breath caught. Behind one row, I swore I saw an eye staring through the vents. Behind another, a tongue writhing like a trapped snake. Something inside those lockers was alive. A cold hand gripped my shoulder. Not stitched, not faceless, human. I spun around and froze. It was me, sitting at the empty desk. My double had my same posture, my same twitch in the right hand, my same torn sleeve. He hunched over the desk, carving my name into the wood, over and over, each letter deep enough to splinter. The gouged marks pulsed faintly with red light, as if veins ran beneath the grain. I staggered back, but the floor stretched with me, lengthening the distance. No matter how many steps I took, I was still standing right in front of the desk. The teacher moved closer. His rope dragged across the floor, fibers fraying and whispering like 100 voices. He placed the noose on the desk in front of my double. My other self trembled, reached out, and looped it slowly over his neck. No, I whispered, but the word didn't come from my mouth. It screeched itself across the chalkboard, in jagged white lines that tore the surface apart. Let me out. The teacher leaned closer, towering, his shadow stretching across every desk, across every wall. His mouth opened slowly, dust spilling from the cracks in his parchment skin. His voice wasn't a voice, was the groan of the entire school. Every locker door rattling, every desk groaning, every bell tolling at once. Class is forever. The students stirred. Their stitches tore open, black tar pouring like rivers. They stepped forward in unison, their heads turning toward me. Not my double dash me. The chalkboard glowed brighter, filling with words I didn't write. You already sat down. You already failed. Class never ends. The bell tolled again. This time, I wasn't just standing when it rang. I was seated. My legs buckled, my body slammed into the desk. The wood splintered beneath my weight. My hand, without permission, picked up the pencil. It carved my name once more. The letters burned red. My double smiled, the first true expression I had seen. His stitches burst, teeth glistening in the tar. He leaned close, whispering with my own voice, "You're not a student here. You're the lesson." The bell rang one last time, louder than thunder, and then everything went black except for the glow of the chalkboard on it. Written in jagged strokes was a final line: attendance complete.